Hello and welcome to the webinar where you're going to learn step by step how to index your own book in Word and why that's a terrific idea in terms of book sales and royalties. This isn't a live webinar. I'm recording it live, but it's a recorded webinar, and there's a reason for that. It's because I have very dear friends who are deaf, so I'm just super aware of the need for providing closed captions for them. They can't join in a lot of live broadcasts, so that's why I've gone this route. You can still ask questions and get some feedback though. If you go on Twitter, you can find me at 4authors, and on Facebook tell me this is how to get there, fb.me. I normally go facebook.com. Anyway, it's /4authors to the page there. So although you won't get live help right here, right now, you can get some help, and I will get to it eventually. This webinar is for you if you're a traditionally published author with a non-fiction book and either your publisher wants an index or you want an index, or you're a self-published author with a non-fiction print book and you want your book to be able to compete with traditionally published books. In both cases, you don't have a spare $1,000 hanging around, either paying upfront or from your royalties over time. You are willing to put in a little bit of time to learning a new skill and producing your index, and you're fairly familiar with Word or very willing to learn. Here's our agenda for the next hour or so. Introduction and a look at what indexing is and isn't, and why it's so important for helping a book's quality, and how that then helps book sales and even reviews. We're going to look at why indexing your own book is a good idea, that there is some precedent for this in the publishing industry. And we'll look at what should and should not be indexed. Then there'll be instructions on how to create your index and some Q&As. That might sound funny with me saying it's not live, but I have taught this in real world offline situations, so I've got some idea of some of the questions that come up. At the end of this webinar, you'll know how to select and mark words in your manuscript and tell Word to then create an index. You'll know how to create page ranges, and you'll be able to categorize your index by grouping topics together. You'll also know how to create cross-references and double postings, and how to analyze and edit your index so that it's a proper index. It's not just something Word can create automatically. And then we'll look briefly at formatting and perfecting the index. This is a free webinar. It's 100% free. I'm not going to be trying to sell you something all the way through it. I'm going to be upfront and say that there is a book I've created that's this webinar is based on, and if you want to go more in depth than you can learn in an hour, then that book might be a good fit for you, but aiming to make the webinar everything you need, because I love this modern business model, the pay it forward thing, where you give valuable information away completely free, and then if people want to buy from you, you give them great value for it and you add bonuses. It's just a win-win situation that is just so positive. And if you don't want to buy, that's fine. You might not be in a position to do so. I've been there. I've been on webinars where I desperately needed the information and couldn't afford the product, and been quite upset really that the main thrust of the webinar has been sales, that they're not giving away what they seem to be giving away. I promise I'm not going to do that. If you do find the content useful and you're not able to, or you don't need to buy the book, then maybe you'll recommend it to somebody else, or perhaps invite me onto your platform, wherever that is. And if you don't have one, you probably have weddings, bar mitzvahs. I'm available. This is me. I thought you might want to see who's talking at you. There I am, behind the gorgeous model. I hate appearing on screen, but I know you have to. I started my career in public relations many years ago. It was actually in Liverpool in England in the 1980s, which was a very, very different era in business. It was quite cutthroat, it was quite stab in the back, and I love that business has evolved and has become much more a win-win situation, as I said earlier. I later qualified as a masseur and aromatherapist. That was in response to having a colicky baby, and I wanted something natural to be able to help her, and it did. So now one of the things I do is I write on the subject of health because of that background and because of the experience I've had there. but my main job was as an IT teacher in high school and business to business training, both IT and software related and soft skills. I taught a lot of soft skills. And then it naturally evolved into writing for others. So I wrote courses and all sorts of different things, manuals, technical manuals for other people, not under my own name. So it took me a number of years to pluck up the courage to write under my own name. And that's what I do now. I'm a full-time author and course creator, and I've been full-time since 2012. 2012 was the Kindle Gold Rush year. It was when it was possible to make a lot of money just from having a few books on Kindle. That isn't so easy now. You need to branch out a bit simply because of the stiff competition. So much competition, so many people putting books out there. When I started though, I wanted to plunge into publishing full time. So I looked at other ways of supplementing my income and the things that authors outsource. So providing author services for people who wanted to take me on as a freelancer. These are the general things that authors outsource. I don't have a graphical brain, so I discounted covers immediately, and I learned how to do formatting and indexing because I discovered just how expensive professional indexers are. So I wanted to learn it for my own books too. I got to grips with some indexing software, the professional indexing software, and it's actually really quite difficult to learn. There's quite a steep learning curve. I realized how useful indexes are to readers. They're really very important. And I noticed how few indie books actually have an index and how much more likely a print book is to sell well if it does have an index. Now, because I'm an IT person, I have an IT sort of brain, I wanted to find a way to make Word work for me, to create a proper index, not an automatically produced one. Because Word is a terrific program and it has some features that enable you to create an index, but a lot of people stop there, they don't go deeper. And after 4 years of experimenting with Word, with using other programs alongside it, with different techniques, I'm ready now to share those techniques hopefully in a way that you'll be able to understand easily, that you don't have to spend all the time I did trying to suss it out and trying to make it work for you. So you definitely don't have to be an IT expert. This is a very, very step-by-step method that once you understand, you'll be able to pick up and run with. Now, if you're not computer literate, if you really don't like them, you could use pen and paper in the old-fashioned indexing way for making your notes. So don't feel that you have to be a Word expert or a computer expert. What I'm trying to get over here is that you can adapt the methods I'm going to teach you to what fits best with how your brain likes to work. Now, I have a workbook available which you might find useful. It's the slides of this presentation, and as you'll see later on, I've done lots of screenshots and boxes to say do this first, do this second, so that might be quite useful for you to have by your side when you're doing your own index. So you can get that from my website, which is forauthors.info/indexing workbook. Now, before we go any further, I'd love to know, if this was live, I'd be asking, how many of you are feeling stressed? Am I setting your teeth on edge by calling the plural of index indexes? I bet I am. I bet there's some of you. Now, in mathematics, the plural of index is indices. In publishing, it is indexes. I did check because I'm a bit of a grammar Nazi myself, so you can relax. If I call it indexes, it's okay, it's correct. This is really key. There are a lot of people in the marketplace at the moment teaching various methods of promoting books. It's all marketing, 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 and it's necessary. We've got to promote our books, but everybody is doing it. So what happens is everybody just shouts louder. Now, it's not a good idea to stop marketing. You've really got to. I tried it. It doesn't work. Your sales tank. But very few people are teaching how to make books stand out in a different way by being more professional and more useful to readers. And that is what indexing does for your book. It makes it more professional. If you're an indie author, you are competing against traditionally published books, and they are more professional. Sadly, it's hard for us to get to their level. An indie book really needs to be made more professional to compete with those traditionally published books. If you're a traditionally published author, you probably understand the importance of indexing more because your publisher will have told you that it's not open for debate. You have to have an index. Our ultimate aim is to sell more books by providing superb content within the structure of our book, what it's talking about, by garnering good reviews from our readers, and by improving our book's usefulness so that people will review it and will recommend it. So you can see here one of the biggest selling books today, still, it's been out for many years, is Think and Grow Rich. So that's gathered over 3,000 reviews. It's probably gone up since I took this screenshot a few days ago. And you can see that one of the things that the print book has is an index. So not only does this book have great content, it's very useful. The index makes it more useful because readers can potential readers, very important, can find out very easily by flicking through the index what's in the book and what's not. And it's gathered a fantastic number of reviews at average of about 4.5 stars. This is selling a lot of books because it's got this, it's a three-legged stool, isn't it? It's got all three things going for it. Now, we know that thousands of books are being published every day, more than at any time in history. And the presence of an index gives browsers more reason to choose your book when they're looking through all of these books that have been published. It also gives them an additional reason to write a review, because if they find your book useful, they are more likely to write a review. The index helps them find it useful because they're able to find in your book the content that they need, that they're looking for, by going to the index. So it's making your book more professional and it's making it more useful, so it makes it more likely to gather good reviews. Now, I want to say this early on. Indexing is a very respected profession, a very old profession. It used to be very, very manual. You would be writing every single topic on an index card, and then you would have to go through and write the page numbers that topic appears on. Very time-consuming method. Then you would have to take all those cards and type up manually the index itself. Today, most indexers have switched to professional indexing software, so it doesn't take quite as long, but it does still take a while. So, an index can cost quite a lot. $1,000 is quite average. It's considered quite average in traditional publishing circles. You could pay more if it's a very in-depth medical, a very high-end, a legal or an academic textbook. You can get an index done cheaper than this on freelance sites, but like anything else, you do get what you pay for. Professional indexers have to study. They go on paid training courses, and they tend to buy their own software as well, which is expensive. So this is Syndex for Windows, which is around $550, and SkyIndex, which I've used, which is just under $600. So that's what professional indexers are using. You don't need to, because we've got tricks to make Word do the same thing. Now, I'm really not trying to do professional indexers out of a job, because it's unlikely that if you've joined a webinar on how to index your own book, that you're in the market for a professional index, either because of budget or time constraints, or because of your speciality. It may be, like a lot of author indexers, that you are the best person to do your index because you're the expert at that field. So maybe in the future you may want to pay a professional to do your index, but having the knowledge that you're going to gain about indexing will actually help you, because you'll be able to liaise with them at a totally different level and get the index you really need. Now, most authors do not have a spare $1,000 lying around, and indies in particular would generally do without an index because they don't understand how important it is, and most people don't have a suitably trained assistant or VA of some type who is able to do a really professional index for them. Sometimes authors will have a go themselves in Word, and what they end up creating isn't a proper index, it's actually a concordance. What they end up with is just a list of entries in their index linked to a random string of page numbers. That isn't very useful for our readers. That isn't very useful for improving our sales and royalties. Now, the definition of concordance is an alphabetical list of words present in a text. It's just a list. It's not had any sort of analysis applied to it. Now contrast that with the definition of index. This is from Art of Indexing by G. Norman Knight, a really good kind of textbook on indexing. He calls an index a systematic guide to the location of words, concepts, or other items. And what that means is it's not automatically generated. Indexes are written. That you don't sort of say I'm creating an index or I'm putting an index together. You say I'm writing an index. So an index differs from a concordance in that it brings related words or phrases from a topic together so that the reader can find them easily. You don't want to make your index difficult for readers to navigate. An index will also cross-reference to related topics, so it'll say see also, or see. So cross-references act like a signpost pointing people to where they need to look if it's not in that position. An index will generally contain some double-posted items as well, so that you can help the readers who might look in one area and the other readers who might look in another area for it. It's like second-guessing them. Now, an index is not kind of a fleshed out version of the table of contents. We do bear the table of contents in mind when we're creating our index, but it's much, much more than the TOC. I do like Word as a program. Let's look at some of the drawbacks of it though. In its indexing module, Word does not handle well names, page ranges, categories, and updates of the index if you've manually adjusted it. So I'm going to show you how to get around that. What we're covering is how to index a non-fiction print book. We don't generally index fiction, and also young children's you wouldn't probably index. Older children, yes, they really appreciate an index. And probably not journal colouring type books. You know, the modern thing for having a minimal content book. Generally, there isn't much use in having an index. Potential book buyers are in the habit of browsing, whether they are looking on Amazon or elsewhere online or in an offline bookstore. They will look at the titles with their head to one side, look at the spine titles, and then they'll pick it up and look at the cover. And then generally they will go to either the TOC or the index. My daughter worked in bookstores and she couldn't believe the number of people who will pick up a book and go straight to the index. It's interesting. Women more than men do that because women are less visual. So if your book is for women, your index is even more important. And it's very easy to compare books. As I showed earlier in the Think and Grow Rich book, it's very easy to go to Amazon, to look on the look inside, click on the look inside, and go to the print book to see if it has an index. The lack of an index can put potential readers off buying your book. Presence of an index can make a browser more likely to choose your book, whether they're browsing online or offline. Traditionally published authors usually have to pay for their own index. That can be a shock, but it's perfectly normal in publishing industry. And as I said earlier, the cost can be upwards of $1,000. Because of this and because of speciality, there is quite a history of authors writing their own index. So if you have a contract, please understand that you probably can do your own index. Many publishers do accept this because they know it's happened in the past for a long time. Most don't really care as long as there is a decent index at the end of the book production phase. You may be able to negotiate if they generally provide you with a list of indexes they've used before. So just ask if you would be able to do it yourself. And know that academic authors often write their own index. What you'll need to do is find out how many pages your publisher has allocated for the index. And then once you have written your index, you can start cutting it down to fit within that space. We know that indexes are generally only seen in traditionally published books, and that's because only traditional publishers see the value, understand the value of them. Indies really are missing out on a trick here, because one of the ways to make your book stand out is to have an index. And it's a massive opportunity for you, if you are willing to learn, to make your book more professional, more able to compete with traditional books. Indie authors aren't limited in the way traditional authors are, because generally we don't have a size or space limitation or time constraints. So we do have an opportunity here to blow the other indie competition out of the water. I want to say something quickly regarding print and digital books. It's really not a good idea to make the Kindle version of your book from CreateSpace if you use CreateSpace for at least one of your print editions. Lots of people are using a combination of CreateSpace and Ingram Spark now, which is great. But there's a facility on CreateSpace just to click to ask them to produce the Kindle version. The presence of your index is just another reason not to do that. I really don't recommend that. I teach formatting as well, and the format produced by a CreateSpace initiated Kindle book is not good. It doesn't adapt well to the different types of Kindles and Kindle reading apps. So this is just another reason not to do that. So if you're going to upload your Kindle version in a Word doc, I don't recommend that, but lots of people use it and it's fine. So you'll need to take the print index out of your book or make 2 copies of the manuscript before you create it. Now this is interesting. It's the index of one of the most respected textbooks on indexing that there is. It's called Indexing Books, and it's published by Chicago, which of Chicago Manual of Style fame. This is the Kindle book, which I'm reading on my Kindle e-reader on my desktop computer, and it's showing you the index in the Kindle book. I keep saying this because I can't quite believe they've done this. What they've done is put the print index in the Kindle book. So these page numbers are completely irrelevant. They're not clickable, and it's just a terrible idea. But it's nice to know that the professionals get it wrong sometimes too. All the things that are wrong with this, the font size is really tiny. I've zoomed in a lot here, but this is tiny. The reference locators, the page numbers are not clickable, which they should be in a digital book, and the page numbers will be wrong anyway because the reader has control in a Kindle book. They have control of font size. Now, this is called an index note at the top, and it's not essential, but if you've done anything special with the index, for example, I'll often do a page number in italics if that page contains an image. So you can put that in a note at the beginning to say page numbers in italics, blah, blah, blah. Now what they've done here is say who the index is written by, and they've done quite an extensive index note. There's really no need to do that in any book other than a book on indexing. You can see why they've done it here because it is of interest, but in a normal book that's not on indexing, not a good idea. The final decision on whether or not to index comes down to a simple question: will it add value to the reader? If you think it will, then it is worth putting in the time to make your book that bit more valuable to your potential readers. Okay, with that all out of the way, let's get started. I'm using a simple 4-step process. We're going to be marking the words in your manuscript. Mark words, concentrating on the book's main themes. Others will come out while you're doing it. Create the index and then analyze and edit it, and then format it and check it. Very simple. Now your skill as the indexer author is going to be in thinking about the things your readers might want to look up. So we're not just going to browse through a manuscript and randomly add lots of words. We're going to be trying to get into the reader's brain. And you need to start by thinking about your book's main topic. So it's genre really, and then its minor topics, the things that you've elaborated in the book. These are going to become main headings in the book, and it is a good idea to jot them down so that you can be looking for them. You need to work through your manuscript right from the front, right to the back, but we don't index front and back matter, so you can skip that bit. And we're going to be concentrating on looking for topics, words and phrases that your readers might want to look up. You'd also need to add any people or works you have referenced within the text. We're going to be focusing on things that are giving substantial information. If you've only just mentioned in passing something, it's not worth sending a reader there from the index. So we don't want to annoy our readers. We want, if they find something in the index, we want them to feel it was worthwhile turning to that page. So we don't want trivial mentions. And as I said before, we don't index front and back matter. We also don't index most footnotes. But if you have provided substantial information in a footnote, that is worth indexing, and there are techniques for doing that as well. But if a footnote is just a reference of where you found it, then you don't need to index. Let's have a look at the step-by-step instructions for marking before I go over live to the document to actually do it. We're going to select a word or phrase, either double click it or click and drag, and then click references on the toolbar at the top, on the ribbon at the top. And this is the references toolbar that you can see here. I've zoomed in and you can see that the mark index entry, it is in full, icon is actually ghosted because I've clicked on it, which has brought up this box. And because I selected some text prior to bringing up this box, the text is already in there populated for me by word. So all I have to do is click either mark or mark all, and that will tell Word that this is something we want to go in the index. I'm going to go across to the document now to show you that live. So I'm going to click references up here and mark entry. Notice that you can also bring this up by clicking Alt, Shift and X on the keyboard. So if you like your keyboard shortcuts, I do, then that's a good way of bringing it up. So we now have the mark index entry window. The text is already in there, so we don't have to do anything other than click mark or mark all. If I click mark, only this entry on this page will appear in the index. If I click mark all, I'll get an entry for bubonic plague as with mark, but there will be multiple reference locators, which are the page numbers, if there are multiple instances of this phrase. So I'll click mark all, okay, and that has put in a field code which will tell Word to add that to the index. Now when you are doing your marking, some things may pop up. They jump out at me a lot if I see inconsistencies or different spellings. Sometimes I'll refer to things with a capital, initial capital, and then other times I won't. And it makes for a poor reading experience for our readers. So if you can correct those while you're doing your marking, it's brilliant because it's just making your book even better. I also spot myself that I sometimes use some words way too many times. So that's another great opportunity to change a few things, get the thesaurus up, find some different words. And sometimes I'll see that things are in the wrong place. Part of the indexing process is that we're grouping things in the index that aren't actually grouped in the manuscript, which is great. But I have noticed in my own book, sometimes I've talked in depth on a topic in one part of the book, and then I've talked about it in another part as if I haven't already covered it in depth. So that's great. I can either cut down what I'm talking about the second time or maybe move it. It's all about this process of making your book better, and the indexing really shows you where things are going a bit odd, especially when you add the index, when you tell Word to put the index in. One of the things that I like to do is use Find or the navigation pane in modern versions of Word to see just how many instances there are of words before I mark them. You can do it both ways. You can mark all, then go to the index and see how many there are, or you can look first to see how many. I find that searching first before marking cuts down on a bit of time that might be wasted. There are certain words that there are just so many instances in your manuscript that you really wouldn't add them to the index. And if you see that before you mark them, it cuts out a step instead of having to remove them from the index after marking them. So let's look at Find in Word 2007. It's Control F on the keyboard, F for Freddy, which brings up the Find and Replace box at the Find tab. And then you can click the reading highlight and it will tell you how many instances of that word that there are. So 70 items, really we wouldn't add that to the index. That would be a terrible choice because it would just look ridiculous and not be any help for readers at all. That's why the search is so great in advance. In later versions of Word, it's the navigation pane. When you click Control F on the keyboard, it brings up the navigation pane. This is good. I actually prefer 2007. I use it more, but the navigation pane is actually more useful in 2016 because it gives you a little snapshot, a preview of each instance so that you can read the context around it and see how useful it is. But if you have this many instances anyway, you're not going to use a word that has that many instances. Now, let's look at instances. If there are a very large number, that topic is too broad and you need to hone down. I always say if there are 9 or more, I would just forget that word and look for something else. If you do have 9 or so, go to each one and read around it to see how relevant that text is, whether it's a substantial amount of information, if it's worth sending a reader to. And I say that you can do this before marking or after. If I see in my search that there are 9 or so entries, I would probably mark all and then update my index to see where they are and if I can group them at all. Then go to each one and remove the field codes from any that aren't relevant enough. I'll show you how to do that. Now, if they are all clumped in one area, it might be worth considering adding a page range, and you can see that instantly from the index because it will say index entry and then the page numbers will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can go to see if those are all connected. There's no other topics in between, and if so, you can change that to be page 1 to 5, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is good. If you do have 9 or so entries, if they're all relevant, then you could change those or consider changing them into a heading with subheadings. Again, we're going to go on to that later. And obviously this leads us to marking ranges. Again, I'll show you the steps first and then I'll do it live. You're going to select the text you want to include. So the first instance of the consecutive pages mentions, the first instance, go to the beginning of the paragraph that appears in, select all the text down to the end of the last paragraph on those consecutive pages, and then click Insert on the ribbon at the top. And from the Insert toolbar, you can click Bookmark, which is next to Hyperlink. It's a little bit like a hyperlink, except it sends you to a place within your document, not on the web. So that brings up this box, and it's not pre-populated like the Mark Index Entry box is. You have to type it in. And there are some rules for this. You can't have any spaces and you can't use symbols. So I like to use capital letters if I have more than one word. It just makes it a bit easier to read and find later. You just add your bookmark name and then click Add, and that's created a behind the scenes bookmark that you can't see, and then you can add the index entry for that. So let's go and do that now. I'm going to do it with bubonic plague actually, because I know there are quite a few entries. So reading highlight, highlight all. I have 6 items. Lovely. There's a page range straight away. So it's a mention on page 84. Page 84 in the book is actually 94 in my document because of the front matter. I start my page numbers at the first chapter, just in case you're wondering about the difference there. So we have 2 mentions on consecutive pages, and it's talking about treatment for bubonic plague. There is no break. It's not bringing other forms in. Yes, it is a break. That's just a small mention. Okay, forget that. So here's a good example of a mention we don't want. This is actually a paragraph talking about pneumonic plague, and it's a brief mention of bubonic, so I need to take that out by selecting the entire field code and clicking delete on the keyboard. It's only taken that one out. It's kept this one in because that's a more substantial mention worth taking people to. Okay, I don't have a page range for this, but I'm going to act as if I did. Now that I've shown you that to take entries out that aren't substantial, I'm going to pretend that it is substantial and create a page range for it. So if we imagine that this is a substantial mention of bubonic plague and this whole thing is related, I would select all that text and then go to Insert on the ribbon and Bookmark. And I need to type this in. No spaces, no symbols, and click Add. So you can't see the result of that, but we do know it's there because we're going to add it to our index entry box. I'm not going to take that out because I want to demonstrate something. I'll just index bubonic. Bringing up my Mark Index Entry box. It's put bubonic in. I'll type plague. You can add and remove from this box. And instead of just clicking mark, we're going to click page range because we don't want it just the current page. We want page range, then click the drop down to bubonic plague. Notice that mark all is ghosted because it's just not available. It wouldn't apply here. We're just going to click mark. And this field code is slightly different. It's redirecting to the bookmark, and you can see that that is written exactly the same as you do your bookmark, so you can spot them easily. Okay, so we've created the bookmark and we've created the index entry for it. This is the theory of that, those steps written down in text form that's in your workbook. You're going to highlight the area and click Insert Bookmark, enter a memorable term without any spaces or symbols, click Add, then click on one of the words at the beginning of that section. It doesn't actually matter what you click on because you can change the box anyway. And then you're going to click the Mark Index Entry box, change the wording if you need to, click page range, and from the drop down select the term you created for the bookmark name. Then click mark and close, and that's your page range created. Before we go any further, let's create our index. And we are creating the index, we're not writing it at this point, we're telling Word to create it. I'm in references on the toolbar again, and I'm just going to click this insert index. Obviously you need to create a page for your index and type index at the top and then insert it. We have a choice here. We have a number of formats, the layouts that we can choose from. I like classic because it separates it into sections. It's just a bit easier for the eye to find things. We have a choice between indented, which means obviously what it says, that each line of headings and subheadings rather is indented slightly, or running, which means that instead of having separate entries on different lines that are slightly indented, they all follow each other. It's personal choice. It depends how much space you have as well. So if you're a traditionally published author looking to fit a lot of index into a small number of pages, then you might prefer running. But you do have to go within your publisher's guidelines. They may have specified indented. Indented seems to be a little bit more popular with readers, according to research, because it's easier to see. It's easier to find what you're looking for in that sort of layout than in that sort of layout. I agree, as a reader I do prefer indented, but I wouldn't worry about it. Just go with what you prefer. As I said, I like classic, and I like to right align my page numbers and put a tab leader just because it's easier for the eye. And then all you have to do is click OK, and we have our first entry. So this is our index. Let me zoom in a bit. Bubonic plague is our index entry. These are our reference locators or page numbers, and we have the bubonic plague appearing on individual pages as well as our page range. And you can see why I didn't remove the field code, the individual field code earlier, because I wanted to demonstrate what would happen. And this happens a lot actually when you're checking your index at the end. You'll see things like this, and it's very easy to go back and remove them. So what we need to do is remove that single field code that's sending us to page 84, because we've got that covered by our page range. So if I go to 84, I can find it easily enough. And the way to select a field code in its entirety is to use your keyboard. If you click Control on the keyboard and then right arrow, it jumps to the end of the word. If you keep hold of Control and add Shift and then right arrow, it jumps and selects, and it selects the entire field code like that, and then you can just click Delete on the keyboard. So then we can go back to our index, and we'll turn Show and Hide off just as a matter of form. It won't matter right now, but when you have a lot of field codes, it can alter the page numbers that appear in the layout in the index. So the very last time you update your index, you really need to make sure that Show and Hide is off, or it can throw the page numbers out. And then I can right click and click Update Field to update the index, and the single entry has gone. Brilliant. Isn't it easy? When you know how, super easy. I'm going to add a couple of other entries before we go any further, because I saw pneumonic when we were looking through. So pneumonic plague, actually, let's see how many there are. Only one, okay. So yes, it is going into a bit of detail. This form of plague broke out. Yeah, okay, that's worth adding. So it's already selected because I'd searched. I'm going to click Mark Entry and just mark this one because I know there are no more. Okay, it's added my field code. I'm going to click Control End on my keyboard to go to the very end of my document. Turn off Show and Hide, right click and Update Field. And we have 2 entries. Great. Now, as this is a book about health, we've already found some illnesses or diseases. It's clear that there are probably going to be more mentioned. So we're going to have numerous names of illnesses scattered throughout our index, and it would be a good idea to pull them together. And this is part of index analysis that you can either do as you go through, marking things, or you can wait till the end. I like to do it as I go through, and then I'll probably do more at the end as well. But when things start to become apparent, I start to put them together. So we could pull these together by simply calling them plague, having a heading of plague and having bubonic and pneumonic listed underneath that heading as subheadings. In this case, I mean, I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes, so we might want to do that, or we might want to have a heading of diseases and list the plagues underneath that as subheadings underneath that, and then there will be other disease names within that entry. And I think we'll do that. So I'm going to whiz back to the beginning by clicking Control Home on the keyboard, and then I'm going to, oh, there we go, pneumonic, sorry, is already there. So I'll click Show and Hide again, and there are a couple of ways of doing this. I'll delete that field code and show you the one way. So I've selected my text, I'm bringing up mark indexed entry. I've added it as a shortcut up there. It's here as well. If you notice, the box that populates naturally is called main entry, and the one below it is called sub entry. So I can delete mnemonic and add it to sub entry. Okay, and we know there's only one entry, so I'm going to click mark. Let's whiz to the index and have a look at how that looks. So it's got a heading of plague with a subheading of pneumonic, which is great. I'll show you the other way of doing it on the bubonic one. Okay, show hide on. Now, notice this field code, we can adjust it. We can cut that. I've clicked Control X on the keyboard, take out the space, that's important. Then go to the end, and we're going to add a colon. That tells Word to make the word preceding the colon a heading and anything after it a subheading. So I'm just clicking Control V on the keyboard to paste, take out that space and that space, and that has now become a heading and subheading. I need to find the others, change those. Now I won't change that because that is my bookmark name, so it's important not to change that. I just need to take out bubonic, make plague a heading by adding colon, and then paste bubonic in again and take out those spaces. Whiz to my index by clicking Control End, turn off show and hide, right click and update field. Now this is acting oddly because it's splitting over two columns, so I'm going to go to page layout and click break, column break, so that it's forcing it so that I can check it looks all right. And it does. So we now have a heading and two subheadings. So again, this is what appears in your workbook. It's showing you how to do it through the main entry box. I've called it diseases in this case because I'm assuming there'll be lots more diseases. And the sub-entry goes in the sub-entry box. And you can click mark all in this case. Now I showed you how to do it through the field code. So let's have a look a little bit more at field codes. They start with a curly bracket and they end with a curly bracket, so that everything within those brackets is the field code, and that does not appear in your manuscript. That's part of the behind the scenes stuff that Word does. They always start with space XE space and then the word that's going to be the index entry within quotation marks. So that's how to spot them. And then there will be other versions when you have a reference to a bookmark, as we've seen, and some formatting things as well. So that's how you know what a field code is, and they will only appear when show and hide is enabled. So as I showed you in the live document, you can remove entries from the index by deleting that field code from that page. Only appears with show and hide enabled. Select the whole thing and hit delete on the keyboard. I want to look at some of the ways that we can adapt Word to make it produce a professional index and not just a concordance. So this is how to get it to work with you and not override you by producing just an automatic index. One of the first things we need to do is reconsider how Word handles names. This is a screenshot from my indexing book, and I've mentioned an indexer and researcher in the book quite extensively called Susan Ollerson. She's produced some amazing research on the reading habits of readers, funnily enough, and how they use indexes, which is really useful. So I've mentioned her, and I've just told Word to add her as normal by just selecting her name and doing the mark index entry. And what it's done is put her under the S's when actually she should be under O. If you look at any professional index, they will list people under surname first. So we need to tell Word to do that. The first method, if you've already selected a word and not known about this, is to enable show and hide and have a look at the field code. And remember earlier we changed bubonic plague so that it was plague first, and that was the heading. Well, we can do the same thing again. We don't need to make this a heading, but we can cut Susan and paste Susan after Olesen with a comma and a space before it. So that will make it sit properly in the index. So double click on the first name, select cut or Control X to bring up to cut it, and then go to the end of the surname, type a comma, then a space, and then paste the word in, deleting any extra space if there is one after Susan. The other workaround is to do it when you're actually marking. So you can do the same cut and paste, but you don't have to go through each instance of the field code. So it's actually better to do this when you're marking, because you just get used to handling names in this way. So the entry would appear as Susan Olesen, then you can cut the first name and add it after a comma and a space after the surname. Let's do that in our Gandhi manuscript. He doesn't actually talk about a lot of people by name, but I did find this one where he's talking about a Dr. Haig. Now, this brings up an interesting thing. You probably wouldn't have done this in your own manuscript. You probably would have found out the referenced person's full name. If you were doing an index for someone else, I would definitely, if I was doing this, I would get back to the author. Impossible in Gandhi's case, obviously, but I would get back to a living author and ask them a little bit more about this if they would like me to add the full name, which out of respect, really, it should be done. In this case, that's not possible, so we're going to add this as it is. So I'm going to click on References, Mark Index, and cut Doctor. Go to the end, type a comma and a space, and paste it in there. And that would be the first name, usually, that is what you'd be adding there. So I'll click Mark All, close, zip to the end, Control End on the keyboard, turn off Show and Hide, right click and update field. And Dr. Haig, thankfully, is appearing rightfully under his surname. This brings up another interesting thing about whether we should put titles in. It's a whole topic of its own. I do cover it in the book. I'm not trying to sell you the book there. You can find this information in other places. On the whole, though, we don't add academic titles, so you wouldn't put PhD in, but we do add medical titles. Okay, so that's the basics of names. You can find extra information about how to handle titled people if you happen to be quoting kings and queens and other titles. You can find that information in indexing reference books, in my own indexing book, and in Chicago Manual of Style. I wouldn't suggest reading it as just reading material, because it can be quite heavy. It throws all the theory at you without any understanding of how to put it into practice. So it's great, hopefully, that you're doing this webinar first before you start needing to look up specific things, specific points of theory of how to handle those. But you get the message that names, we need to move the first name to the end and list people under their surname first. Another thing that's often done in professional indexes is that the indexer will add extra information so that you can identify that person. Now, you probably don't need to do it in many instances, but there are occasions where you will have two people of the same name. Now, if you were writing maybe about Alaska, and there are a lot of Palins in Alaska, I don't know if there are, maybe there are, I don't know. But if there are a lot of Palins in Alaska and you happen to mention two different Palins with the name of Sarah, you could add this information either in the mark index entry box by just putting an identifying word in so that readers know who you're talking about, or you can add it directly in the field code if you want to. It's just about making our index as helpful as possible to readers. And let's look at cross-references now. Indexing experts say that an index without cross-references is not a good index. So we need to add some. Word gives us the facility when we select a word and bring up the mark index entry box. Instead of the default current page, we can click cross-reference, and we'll need to add where we want to cross-reference to. So a cross-reference is sending a reader from one word or phrase to another one in the index. It will appear in the index and it will say it's not in this section, it's in another one. You could also add see also. So where you're covering a topic in one section and you mention something related, you could send them to that as well. In that case, you need to add 2 entries. So you would index it as normal, and then what I tend to do is select the next word after the indexed word and bring up mark index entry again and add the cross-reference to that word, because it doesn't really matter. You change it in the box. I'll show you live in the document more about what I mean about using any word to add a cross-reference. But this is the way to do it. Select a word, bring up mark index entry, click on the cross-reference radio button, and then type in the phrase. Now, it's got to be a phrase that's already in the index or that you intend to put in. We don't want cross-references that send people nowhere. It's important to check on that. And that's where you would type the phrase and then click mark. Again, mark all is ghosted out. Then you would update the index and it would show the cross-reference. This is a cross-reference, so it doesn't have reference locators, it doesn't have page numbers, it's just sending you to a different part of the index. The see also cross-reference, as I mentioned earlier, is sending readers to another place as well as where they are at the moment. So it's slightly different from the see cross-reference that doesn't have reference locators, and that's only a signpost, and we're going to do those manually. Back in the document, we have a whole chapter on contagious diseases. So it's actually worth making this entire chapter a page range. Okay, so I'm going to go to Insert, Bookmark, and type in the name. Contagious diseases. And I need to go to the beginning of that section to mark it. References, mark entry. Now it's put it in capitals. I don't want that, so I'll change it. Now look what I did here. One of the principles of indexing is that we mostly index nouns. So nouns are people, places, names, things, tangible things, because that's what readers are going to be looking for. They will be looking for diseases rather than contagious diseases. So we just switch them round, which is fine. So clicking on page range, and we've got it under C. Okay, mark, close, zip to the end, turn off show and hide, and update. And we now have a D. Okay. If we were to index this full manuscript, we might later convert diseases into a heading, and then we could have contagious underneath as a subheading, and then we might even put plague under there and other things. For now, we'll leave it at this because we can change it later. But I'm thinking we could have a see also under plague for see also contagious diseases. Okay, there are 2 ways of doing this. You can have your see also appear at the end of a list of subheadings, or you can have it appear alongside the main heading. Traditionally, it goes at the end of the list. Now we can add it via any other word. So plague is our heading, and we have to add something as our subheading, and then also diseases. Now, it's indexing practice to put the C or the C also in italics, and then the rest is not in italics. Marking that. Now, the reason I added the XXX there is that I need to take it out, and XXX stands out for me. It just forces it to be underneath the plague heading. So I can just select that and delete it. And if I put a tab in between See Also and Diseases, it will force it to the right. So that's the See Also cross-reference. But if I wanted to add, I think there's cholera. Yes, okay. Good, this isn't within the contagious diseases section. So I'm going to add an index entry for cholera to C, diseases. Okay, I haven't checked how relevant it is. I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. If I update that, we should have a C. Okay, so we've got our cross-reference cholera. It doesn't have its own entry because let's imagine that there isn't enough information on it, but we're directing our readers to the diseases section because it's going into diseases in depth there. Great. Now notice that when I updated my index, it took out my XXX. So when you update your index for the very last time, when you've checked it and you've got everything where you want it, you would update it for the last time and then go through doing your final adjustments, such as taking out things like this and putting things where you want them. So you can do See Alsos manually. Right, let's bring up a good thing to show. When you type things in, sometimes it doesn't keep the formatting of the rest. So you can click on the formatting that you do like, click Format Painter, and then drag it over, and it's right. Okay, so you can add things manually. Need to make that italics. I also make to indent. But when I update, that will all change. So only add things manually at the very end. And this is a case for keeping a note of what you're doing and what you might want to add at the end. Okay, so I'll update that now and you can see it disappear. Okay, there we go. So back to how this will appear in your workbook. Creating a See Also reference. You can do it as I showed you, or you can type it in directly into the index at the very end after you've updated it for the last time. Let's look at some mistakes to avoid when indexing. Not formatting is a biggie. People don't realize that you can alter your index. Again, the last time after you update it, then you can alter formatting. So to fit more things in, you could adjust the font size, the line spacing. There are a lot of things you can do. It's also good to be aware that you can add column and page breaks, and you would want to do that if you have a heading and a list of subheadings and Word forces a column or a page break in the middle of that list. If that's the case, it's worth looking to see what you can do. You could adjust the line spacing of everything to see if you can force it together. You don't want what they call in the computer industry widows and orphans, where you have a heading on one page or column and then just one line from the subheadings split onto the other page. So it would be better to force them together, or to put the column break slightly earlier so that you've got two subheadings on the following page. And in that case, you need to manually add the heading again with continued after it so that it's clear that that is part of the previous section. This is a mistake people often make. They update the index with show and hide still enabled, so the page numbers will be terribly wrong. If you have a long index, you have a lot of field codes in your document, so they alter the page numbers because they're adding extra text, and with show and hide enabled, that adds all those extra field codes as if it's part of the text. As I mentioned earlier, Cross-references are considered essential if the index is to be called a good index. We also don't want long strings of reference locators, page numbers, so always check the relevance of each one. If they're all relevant, consider splitting it so that you have turned it into headings and subheadings, as I showed you earlier how to do. If you still feel you have too many, then perhaps that topic is too broad, and consider drilling down even further. You don't want any consecutive page numbers within your reference locators if those pages are handling the same topic over the range of the pages. So you need to go to any topics that have consecutive page numbers in your index and go to see if the topic is spreading over those pages. If it's not, if it's broken up with other topics, then you can have consecutive page numbers, but you do need to check. And every index pretty much needs headings. It needs to be categorized because headings indicate the main topics of your book. Now, in general, if you have 5 to 7 page references, that's considered okay. More than that, and you need to start narrowing down. And as I showed you earlier, the pure instance was just way too many. That's not useful for a reader. It's making them work way too hard. In some cases, you might be able to use that topic. If there are more than 9, forget it. But if there are about 9, you might be able to use it by going to each one, seeing how relevant it is, getting rid of the few of them, and splitting it into headings and subheadings, and possibly some page ranges. Now, I mentioned formatting the index. Let's look at what we can change. Word's default font that it creates the index in most versions of Word that certainly that I've tried, it uses Calibri, which is a sans serif font. Times is an example of a serif font, and you can see what serifs are. They're the little jutty out bits at the edges of letters. Calibri is fine for your index, but if you decide to change the font to be in keeping with the rest of your manuscript, then just be aware that serif fonts are considered slightly easier to read in print format. Sans serif fonts are used for online documents, so they're considered easier to read on a screen. So just wanted you to be aware of that it does default to Calibri, and you can change it if you want to. The size should be publishing industry standard, at least 2 points smaller than the body text. Now you can see from this index that the default Calibri is used, and size 9 font size. Now my manuscript does happen to be in size 11, but even if my manuscript was in size 14 font size, Word would still do this default of Calibri and 9.9. So just to make you aware that if your manuscript is particularly small, if you perhaps had it at size 10, not advisable, but maybe, you never know, then you need to make your index 2 points smaller. We can adjust the line spacing, as I mentioned earlier, so if you do have space constraints, you could make that slightly smaller, slightly tighter. And you can change your indents. If you change one, you'll notice that they all change. So I'm on an indent here. I'm going to bring up, I'm pressing Alt 0 and then P on the keyboard to bring up my paragraph box, but I could get to it from page layout if I wanted. So the standard indentation is 0.15. If I change that, you'll notice that they all change. That one didn't because I put it in manually, but these would all change. That looks terrible, so I very much approve of Word's 0.15, but just to let you know that it is possible. And it's really important to go through and check that you don't have widows and orphans, so you don't have a heading starting at the bottom of a column and then the subheadings at the top of the next, and you're not splitting them up so that there's only one subheading on a line all on its own. So let's look at how to do that. I've added a few entries to the index. I haven't checked them for relevance, I just added a few just to force this to happen. What we have here is a heading at the end of one column that's split up the subheadings onto the next column. So it's only got one heading on this side. Now, there are various ways of handling this. You can change the line spacing by right-clicking and going to paragraph, and notice that we have at least 14 line spacing. We could take that down and see what happens. Yes, that sorted it. So if that hadn't sorted it, oops, it always goes back to the start when you update. If that hadn't sorted it, there are other ways of handling it. We could force this plague to go to the top of the next column. This isn't a great example because we don't have lots of other things in the index, but imagine it was full. We could go to page layout, breaks, column, which forces a column break. If this was at the end of the page, that would be appropriate. Okay, take that out. Now let's imagine that there are other entries below bubonic and we decide that we do want it to split there. We can add, manually adding, so this has to be the very last thing you do after updating your index for the last time. We can add a heading ourselves. I need to force a column break. I'll need to make that italics. Okay, and notice that it comes in line with the subheadings because it thinks you want it there. So all you need to do is go to a heading, any normal thing that's not indented will do. Click Format Painter and that will go, click on the heading that's indented and it will go back to where it should be. So it's a good idea to do that whenever a list of subheadings is split up so that readers can easily see that it's part of the previous section. So you can add continued shortened like that, you can add it in full, or you can put it in brackets, whichever you feel happiest with, but whatever you do, be consistent. Okay, on to checking your index, assuming you've added lots and lots of entries. The things to look for, I mentioned earlier, we're looking for consecutive pages. Another thing is Roman numerals in your index. If you have them, it depends how you've done your page numbering, but if you're like me, and I'm copying traditional publishing standards, I use Roman numerals for my front matter and I start page 1 at chapter 1 or part 1. So if you have Roman numerals, go to the field codes for them and check that they're not in front matter, which shouldn't be indexed. So anything before chapter 1 or part 1, you can index your introduction if you want to, if it's part of your manuscript, if it's giving substantial information, but do check. I would go very carefully through my front matter and remove any field codes from there because they shouldn't be there. So here's an example of a field code in the table of contents. You really don't want that there. What's the point of sending a reader from the index to the TOC? So you would just select that field code and hit delete on the keyboard. Now, a lot of people ask how long an index should be. The average is 3 to 5% of the indexable text. So that's anything that's not front matter or back matter. So that would result in a 3 to 5 page index in a 100-page book. Textbooks tend to be longer, so medical, legal, computer manuals. Textbooks tend to have a longer index, 10 to 15%. So if you had a mammoth 500-page book, you could have an index of up to 25 pages and it'd still be considered acceptable. These are just guidelines though. In a 100-page book, if you had a 16-page index, that's overkill. And the other way around, if you only had a 3-page index in a 500-page book, you need to put a little bit more work in on your index. On to questions, and this is the first one that people ask: how long does it take to index a book? In the past, when indexers used manual methods using index cards, it took around about a week, and that was a fast indexer, a long time. Now that we are able to use Word and we're able to use the methods that I've shown you to force Word to work with us, you can do an index in under a day. I usually allocate a morning or an afternoon, but I've been doing them for a while. But I would allocate a day initially and be encouraged that you will get quicker. And people always ask how difficult it is to index a book. It really isn't difficult. As you've seen, it's just selecting words that are relevant and adding them to the index, and then going through the index to analyze it, take out things that shouldn't be there, all the things I've shown you. It's not difficult, it's really not. It's just about putting the time in and putting the thought into the analysis, into thinking about what your reader might want to find in your index, might want to look up in your book. People always ask if some books are easier or harder than others. And I guess that sometimes it's harder when it's a topic you don't know, but when you're indexing your own book, that's not the case. I love indexing history and travel books because it's really obvious what should go into the index. Places you've mentioned, places you've been in the book, in travel books instances. And history books, you need to index every person, place, battle, thing that's gone on. So they're really fun to index. They're quite meaty. You can really get into them. But honestly, I don't find any book really hard to index, and I'm sure you won't find yours hard to index when it's your own and you know it really well. What should be indexed in the book is everything between the front and back matter. So front matter is everything before chapter 1. You can index your introduction if it contains substantial information, but definitely not the table of contents, any bibliography, any pages of notes, or a glossary. Footnotes should only be indexed if they contain substantial extra information, as we've looked at. And people who don't have Word often ask me if you can use other programs. I've used OpenOffice and that works okay. That's okay. Other programs I'm not familiar with. I don't think Mac Pages can do it, because when I had a MacBook, I actually bought Office for Mac so that I could index on it. Okay, any other questions that you have, I can answer on Twitter or on Facebook. So here's your action plan. Because indexing a book is such a good idea, it makes it more valuable to readers, more likely to get good reviews, it takes it up a notch and on level of professionalism. It's a good idea to add an index to all your non-fiction print books when you can. So index your current book, and then if you're revising your older books, you could add an index then. That's the way to do it without feeling too much overwhelm. In the workbook, I've added things that I haven't been able to cover here, otherwise this would end up being a 6-hour webinar. So there are prompts and step-by-step things that you can see in there. You can contact me, as I've said, if you do have any specific questions. And not to be overly salesy, but I've packed a whole lot more information into my indexing book, which has more of a step-by-step thing going through it, using the same Gandhi manuscript actually. And I've interwoven theory as we go through, so that it's not just an information dump with the theory, you're learning it as you progress through. I am creating a course about this because it's a bigger topic than you can cover just in an hour really, and I need real life examples for that course. So if you are indexing your book and you hit a problem, then I would love to help you with that so that I can cover that type of problem in the course. Finally, before we finish, don't forget that you do need to market your book. You're making your book super professional by adding an index, but no one will know how professional it is if you don't do some kind of marketing. However, everybody is marketing, so it's really important to make your book even more appealing to readers, potential readers, and more likely to get good reviews by having this professional index that you now know how to do. Thank you so much for attending and for sticking with me this far. I hope that this hasn't confused you, that it's left you feeling a can-do attitude, that you can do your index, and good luck with it. Well done for getting to the end of the webinar. It's not been an easy topic, but it's not difficult either. It's just a question of putting the time in now to create your own index. And good luck with it. Good luck with your index and with your whole publishing journey.